Belinda, why are your backgrounds always backwards? Eat or
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
He's trying to fix it.
We're just sorting through some technical issues here.
there we go, Belinda. Yay.
It's backwards to me, so I have to think about it.
Yeah.
But does anybody know what it is?
It is the city of Lethbridge Roth. Value of this unit, 150,000. Nope.
It is the unit we brought in when we switched from coal to natural gas in our power plant in the 1950s.
Wow.
Since we're doing utilities, I thought it's an appropriate picture.
Very nice. Are we still using it is the question.
That's more for Doug to answer than me.
We're ready to
The
go?
power plant's demolished, I'm sorry. It's demolished. Along with water treatment plant number 1.
Okay. Well, we are ready to go. So we'll begin with the acknowledgement statement. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I'll now ask our City Clerk to do the roll call.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Councillor Campbell.
Present.
Councillor Carlson.
Present.
Councillor Kaufman.
Present.
Councillor Croson.
Here.
Councillor Morrow.
Yeah.
Councillor Parker.
Here.
Acting Mayor Higgin.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Miyashiro.
Here.
Mayor Spearman.
Present.
All accounted for, and in chamber we have myself and Janessa from Clerks and Mayor Spearman. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have City Manager Craig Dalton on the line as well. I see Director of Infrastructure Doug Hawkins. I see Mr. Kaup, who'll be presenting, and Mr. Sanchez, who'll be presenting as well. So with that, we'll move on to adoption of the agenda. So the agenda has been circulated. So we have the resolution to adopt the agenda. Okay, moved by Councillor Miyashiro that the agenda of the Economic Standing Policy Committee on March 10th, 2021 be adopted as presented.
Call the question.
Question's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? There are none. Thank you. Next, we have approval of the minutes of February the 24th. Oh, sorry, consent agenda. Okay, from Acting Mayor Higgin, be it resolved that the minutes of the Economic Standing Policy Committee held on Wednesday, February the 24th, 2021, be approved, and the mayor and the city clerk be authorized to sign the same. Is that the consent agenda, or is this the approval of minutes motion?
It's all the same.
All the same? Okay. Acting Mayor Higgin?
Call for the vote.
Question's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? There are none. Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to presentations. We have Mr. Doug Kaup here to present for water, wastewater, stormwater management, and the CIP projects for 2022 and up to 2031. Welcome, Mr. Kaup.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. so here's my CIP, the 10-year plan. So this will include projects beyond the 4-year window, and we'll start off with water. So next slide. So you'll see also in your package are the detailed sheets and the summary to give you a real better picture of what years the expenditures are in. Next slide. So these are the 7 water utility CIP projects within the full 10-year window. We have water plant process redundancy, medium voltage upgrades, UV disinfection upgrades, a fill line twinning, conceptual design for a new river intake, and a couple reservoir upgrades later in the window. So I'll go through each of these in turn. Go to the next slide. So this is E12. It's the water treatment plant process redundancy. This one has been on the CIP docket for a couple of cycles already. The story here is that the water treatment plant, plant number 3 that was built in the early 80s, has 2 clarifier units, each rated at 75 million liters a day. And each winter, the units get taken out of service one at a time in order to do preventative maintenance. And as you know, over the last 30-some years, the demand for water has grown to the point that it's challenging to operate in wintertime with only 1 unit. And also there's concern that in summer, when the demand is more than twice, that if there were a failure of a unit, then we'd be in trouble. So this is a $14 million project. It starts next year, and will take a couple years at least to construct. And it is the addition of some clarifier capacity. We're applying newer technology in this particular case to keep the footprint smaller, and that helps contain the costs as far as structure to house it. Next slide, please. E13 is medium voltage upgrades at the water plant. This includes many components. It has, will provide function to allow us to switch between transformers. We have 2 large transformers on the feed to the plant. We operate on one or the other, and in order to switch over, we have to call Stu Perkis's folks down and essentially shut the power off, and then restart up the plant on the other transformer. This isn't something we do regularly, but we have a procedure for us to do this in order to do testing on the transformers as well as in the case of emergency if we had to do that. So this will facilitate that operation a lot better. There are some huge high voltage cables that run from those transformers into the plant that are at the end of their life cycle. There's switch gear and variable speed drives for pumps. So this is a $7.5 million of electrical upgrades at the plant. Again, scheduled to start with the design work next year, and it'll take a year or two to wrap up. Next slide. So this E14 is the water treatment plant UV disinfection upgrades. So the UV equipment that was installed in 2003 is approaching its 20th birthday. Besides the age of the equipment, there is a bit of a regulatory justification for this expenditure. In the late 90s, when we were making plans to comply with new regulations for disinfection, we were faced with a couple options, that neither of which we liked. One was to switch to free chlorine in order to achieve our goals, and the prospect of, though it would have achieved the regulatory requirements, it would had an adverse effect on the taste of the water, and would be more akin to what you would experience in the city of Calgary, where they use free chlorine. And then the alternative to that was a very expensive ozone system that was tens of millions of dollars, and of great concern over the cost. Fortunately, in the late 90s, it was determined that that UV would address the the concerns for performance, and so it was the perfect fit for Lethbridge because it didn't impact the awesome taste of the water that our customers have grown accustomed to over 100 years, and it would achieve the disinfection requirements. But because of that, and because we had a regulatory timeline, we were a very early adopter of the technology. We had the first of two or three of these operations in the province, and so we had the equipment before the regulations were in place for how to use them. So in the end, the units that we have are not validated to the protocols that were established after we bought them, and because of that, we have to operate them at a much higher energy setting than we would a new unit. So this is will help us with energy consumption, and with the newer models, we'll have more reliability and access to parts. Next slide. E15 is the Uplands and Gary Drive Reservoir fill line twinning. This is a huge pipeline. It is about 3/4 of a meter in diameter. It's a high pressure concrete pipe, and because it's in the river valley, it has the very high pressures, and our concern now is that given some high profile failures in Calgary and elsewhere in Western Canada, that our best strategy here is to twin that pipe, because it's so critical. It supplies water to the Gary Drive Reservoir as well as the Uplands Reservoir, and so a failure of this pipe would take out a third of our water supply. And it's again, this is just our approach to managing the risk of a failure in the river valley where the pressures on that pipe are over 200 pounds per square inch. So we've got this starting out at in 2025 with the engineering exercise, and then the capital expenditures will go into the next budget cycle. Next slide. So E16 is the river intake conceptual design. There's been a bunch of incremental improvements since the mid 50s, but when the weir was installed, there was the side channel was dug, creating that island, and we had an open channel that actually went right to the door of the plant. And some of that's been converted in the 80s, was converted into pipeline. So on the water plant yard, there isn't an open channel, but we still have that side channel going around the weir to feed the plant. So the operational challenge with our current configuration is that in flood conditions or high water conditions, we experience a lot of silting in that channel that has to be dredged out routinely to make sure that the water can flow into the plant over the winter, that we don't have ice freeze down to the shallow level that's created by the silt building up. And so we want to investigate alternatives. Other water plants have structures that actually sit out in the river to pull the water into the plant. And so that's what this $200,000 effort in 2024 is, just to see what that future project might look like. Next slide, please. So E17 is upgrades to the Uplands Reservoir. Some of the scope of this project appeared in the last CIP cycle as E21. We had reservoir upgrades project that included upgrades to the Northeast Reservoir, Uplands Reservoir, and Mare McGrath Reservoir. To date, we are still working on the first one. We intend to have the improvements at Northeast to be completed or near complete by the end of this year. And so rather than leave this, rolling this project forward, out another 10 years, we've elected to decouple these next two projects so that we can spread them out in time and push them out down the calendar. So this is the portion that was applied to the Uplands Reservoir. We've got it in the expenditures in the next CIP cycle in 2026, and it's $5 million. Next slide. So E18 is the last of the water utility CIP projects, and just like the one that prior that I just described, this work was included in E21 in the current CIP, but it's just because of cash flow considerations and higher priority projects that you've already heard about. This has been pushed out to 2030, and so we have it on a separate sheet. It makes it easier for us to work in 4 or 8 years from now when we're doing the other CIPs. This will roll along and not have a complicated story about previous expenditures. So the next slide is really the bottom line, the financial impact of this plan as presented on the rates. The red line, you may recall from previous CIPs, is the capital payment capacity. So this is the line item in the operating budget that is the mortgage payments on the borrowing for these capital projects. And so you can see that there is in the next 4 to 6 years, this plan has imposes no upward pressure on that line, where we can stay within the budgeted financial plan within the budget for managing these payments. And so the projects as presented today will have no impact on the operating budget until, like I said, 6-7 years out, in which case we'll be back in 4 years with new numbers, and there may be if these first projects come in under budget, then there'll be additional capacity financially, and there's also we'll have better estimates of those later projects as far as what the cost will be because of studies like the intake study and the engineering work on that pipeline twinning. So next slide. With that, I'll answer any questions you have on the water CIP before we move on to the wastewater.
Thank you. It's a good time to take a break. And Councillor Carlson has a question, and there are others. So, yeah. Go ahead, Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thank you, Mr. Kaup, for the explanation and presentation. So just to be clear, we're approving a 10-year plan, but only approving the funding for the first 4 years. So some of the projects like 15, 17, 18 are there as placeholders. They're not actually being approved at this time, right?
That's correct. They serve a couple purposes. They demonstrate to you that I'm thinking ahead, and they also give you a sense if there is foreseen pressures into the future, then it signals you what our plans look like beyond the 4 years.
And thank you. So that I think one of your last statements was, if we have increased capacity or funding comes available, we could move those forward because they're on the books. Is that the sort of thought there?
Well, it's a long shot, but sometimes there's grants. I think the point I was trying to make is that you shouldn't be concerned about the bars being over the line that far into the future, because the capital costs, the expenditures aren't firm until the project's complete. And so if I think that it's going to take $10 million to deliver, and it's $1 million under budget, in the end, then that's capacity, that creates capacity for future work.
Joe.
Is now joining.
Thank you. Thanks, Mayor Spearman.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Miyashiro.
Oh, your mic's not on.
Should just let me go on. It would have gone a lot faster.
Well, it might have.
I think this was kind of answered, but in terms of your graph and showing the expenditures over time, I think those are the priorities then. So the first one is the redundancy, then electrical upgrades, then so and so. Is that correct?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
that's correct. So they've been prioritized based on our operational needs and any, if there's any regulatory pressure. But in this case, it's all about life cycle replacements and managing risks.
And one question regarding the pipeline from the river to the water treatment plant. We heard last week that some groups for the recreation master plan, possibility of building a whitewater access at the weir. Could we do that at the same time we're putting pipelines in?
No.
Theoretically?
No. Well, it would be totally unrelated. And not in the same proximity. I think the opportunity for those parties for that future project is really in the context of the design of that water intake. And so if once we have a plan figured out with some clever folks about how to get water into the plant, we may be able to reopen that side channel that has a causeway on it today,
right.
And which was Stu Rood had mentioned that in the past it was beautiful because he could paddle right down that side channel. So that I wouldn't rule that out as a future possibility.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Councillor Campbell.
Thank you. Thanks for the information. And this, of course, is a world, one of those worlds where I know nothing about things like this, but it's obviously things we need. But I was just wondering, over the course of your career, Mr. Kaup, in terms of technology advancements, do these sorts of things are there advancements? Have there been advancements that it's not like an iPhone, but do things change very rapidly, or is it kind of a pipe is a pipe and that's as good as it's going to get? Or what, like, do you go to conventions? Do people, what can we see down the road is in terms of, can we find new advancements that cost less, that sort of idea?
Yeah, there's always research and work going on in the field. Some things don't change quickly, and some of the technology that we apply is just as good as it was 50 years ago. I think the use of the ultraviolet disinfection on drinking water was really a big development 20 years ago, and it did it really did favor our operation, financially over the alternatives. We use different chemistry now than we did on my first day on the job 30 plus years ago, and so there's slow incremental advancements, and then every once in a while there's a big development that changes the game.
Do you see anything right now that people are working on that could change the game? Is there something that's sort of big flag here? This is something to look forward to.
Nothing that's got me really excited. The technology that we're we intend to apply to the redundancy project is has been around for a decade or two, and so in some respects we're playing a bit of catch up, just because we now have a need to apply that technology. But yeah, there's always developments, and there's also continuous review of regulations and the performance requirements. We get a few times a year, Health Canada sends out bulletins on the latest concern or the latest regulatory limit on contaminants of this and that, and you witnessed those impacts when we talked about dealing with the lead services early last year. And so there's the bars is continues to get higher as far as how good the water has to be to keep it healthy and safe, but the tools to achieve that get sharper as well.
I look forward to 5G water. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thank you, Mr. Cope. A couple of things in terms of information as we're trying to get better at providing information. I've seen it in a couple of your slides. You are referencing previous CIPs. If you could possibly ensure that past CIPs are all recognized or acknowledged, because some of these things, for example, reservoir upgrades, travel from CIP to CIP to CIP, which is fine. But if we don't talk about them in the right context, the 2014 to 2023 CIP E22 spent dedicated $3.67 million to the Uplands Reservoir. And then the following CIP E21 18 to 27, years 18 to 27 was 3.7 million. So somebody's not muted. Sorry. So it just following back through these things, I think, can help members of council understand when and where projects have changed, if scopes changed. But it's also important, I look at it as being, well, have we spent $7.3 million on the Uplands Reservoir upgrade already since 2014?
Yeah, and so the answer to that is no. We haven't spent anything on the Uplands or the Mare McGrath reservoir upgrades from in the context of the previous CIP. The priority was the Northeast Reservoir, and those expenditures are still underway. So and I understand your concern that if we're counting money twice, we need to be clear about that. But in this case, those expenditures were not made.
Okay, so these I do note that they're all from borrowings, so I'm assuming we've not passed the applicable borrowing bylaws for them. So we've not incurred any cost, but this is about this is the closing the loop on these things, because yes. if CIP cycle, much like the operating budget cycle, is once every 4 years, and none of us are here in the next cycle, we don't know where we've been, we don't know where we're going. This is about providing council the ability to look at past decisions and past direction, but we do need to close the loop in some senses too. So if we could just make sure, and this applies across all the utilities, if you don't mind, Mr. Hawkins, please, that we have these previous CIPs identified, just makes life a little bit easier. The other one that I see that you're doing as well, and I appreciate this, is if there could be reference in the literature on the CIP pages for anything that has an environmental regulation or performance requirement. So if we're being forced federally or provincially to upgrade, I would appreciate seeing that as well. That certainly helps with the conversation with the community, but it also understands us how other governments are dealing with this. The final thing, and I don't know if this actually falls under you or if this comes through facilities, but I rarely, if ever, see anything in terms of alternative energy projects. Now, I recognize we couldn't outfit the water treatment plant or the wastewater treatment plant with solar panels. We wouldn't be generating enough, I don't think, to be running it. But we have a lot of tiny infrastructure scattered throughout the city. Are we looking at panels, alternative energies for these smaller structures, get them theoretically off the grid, but to be able to become a little more self-sufficient in our energy production? Is this you, or does that come through facilities? I see Mr. Hawkins is raised.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that, Doug. The it is corporate. It's not just facilities, and council has yet to see, or the committee has yet to see, the results of the energy efficiency master plan that we did, sort of taking a corporate lens, which will answer that question. So those, there is a meeting set, a schedule set to have that presentation of that planning to both the economic SPC and I believe Civic Works SPC in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So, so that has been contemplated. Nothing that you're seeing here today, though. You'll see some projects in the context of that planning work coming forward. It's safe to say, in terms of the water projects, there's nothing directly related to alternative energy being presented as part of the water CIP today. Doug, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I guess it, besides the alternative energy being, seen as a positive development, we need to assure the reliability of our system, that the water doesn't go off because a cloud goes over the panel, or and the loads, the power loads are quite high. If you recall from the operating budget, the water utility has over $2 million of energy. You'll see in the report, when energy report, when that comes through, that a significant portion of the energy consumed by the corporation is in water and wastewater. So we have some very big machines, and so in some cases it's just a practical application of those technologies.
Okay, absent in my recognition, but we'll wait for the report. So thank you to all the Dougs that responded. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Thank you. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thank you again, Mr. Kaup. Just a quick question, kind of triggered by Councillor Campbell's question. There's been a lot of talk lately, obviously, about selenium. I know one of our MLAs mentioned that there is good progress made about technology to remove selenium from the water supply. Is that a point of source technology that they're referencing, or is that something that should be on our radar for point of treatment?
No, it's definitely point of source that they're talking about, in which case, they're dealing with, higher concentrations, bringing them to lower concentrations, rather than after it's been diluted in the river and we deal with it. So it's really at the mine where that technology is being applied.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. And final question on that: do we monitor, or do we have any ability to monitor for selenium at present?
Yes, it's routinely measured. We include it in our raw water analysis that gets done monthly, and Alberta Environment also does sampling in the river.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Good. Thank you. That appears to be all the questions from Council on water. If we can move on to wastewater, please.
Super. So yeah, next slide. So again, we've got 7 projects, and that again are, in order of priority on the calendar, just like with water. There's biosolids treatment upgrade, effluent water system upgrade, some electrical stuff, blowers, UV disinfection, and then farther out is phosphorus recovery and lagoon upgrades. So next slide. So the first project is the wastewater treatment plant biosolids upgrade at I don't know how many CIP cycles ago, but at one point we had a new digester in the mix, and so rather than building a third digester for millions of dollars, it was recognized, last cycle that that what we really needed was better performance on the dewatering of the sludge, and that way we could get better capacity out of those digesters. So this is the biosolids treatment upgrade. It is using it's making a shift in technology. When the plant was upgraded for biological nutrient removal in the 90s, the sludge thickening equipment, it was a gravity belt thickener. It operates still to this day, but it is essentially you have a porous belt that's spinning, and the sludge gets slopped on top, and the water runs out the bottom. And so there's lots. It's there's a lot of moving parts, and it's constantly wet, and so it is not a great environment for a machine. And because we only have one of them, it's a very critical piece of equipment at the wastewater treatment plant. So I like to tell people, and I don't think it's too much of a stretch, that gravity belt thickener is probably one of the best maintained pieces of equipment in southern Alberta. It gets a lot of attention and preventative maintenance so that it's reliable, it's there when we need it. So the idea is to replace that with a lot more less maintenance intensive technology, which is dissolved air flotation. And so instead of mechanically removing the water, we actually float the sludge by introducing jets of air bubbles, and it makes like a foamy froth that floats off the top, and so it's less moving parts, and or anticipate that it'll be a lot more reliable. The plan is to have 2 or 3 of these units in the design, so that we have the redundancy that we don't have today. There is a in the current CIP, there's this project shows up at a lower cost, so we've got a better sense of the budget, and so it's the anticipated cost has gone up since 4 years ago when I talked about this before. Next slide, please. So this E20 is a new project. It did not appear in the previous CIP. It quickly rose to a high priority. With the completion of the new headworks, there was an added demand for the effluent water in the plant, just at the headworks, and so upon commissioning the headworks last year, we discovered that that the effluent water system was inadequate and in need of an upgrade. This was an oversight. The system, the purpose of the system is to take treated wastewater and pump it back into the plant to be used by the other processes within the plant, and to supplant the use of potable water to add to the efficiency of the operation. So this reduces the amount of potable water, city water that is used at the wastewater treatment plant, and it's for $1 million we can add that capacity and expand that system to meet our new needs. Next slide, please. So E21 is the electrical upgrades, not unlike the story I told at the water plant. This is, replacing, life cycle replacements of switchgear and other electrical equipment. The wastewater treatment plant, a lot of that electrical gear dates back to the 70s even. So it's not only is it difficult to get parts to keep the system moving along, but it was brought to our attention by Stu's folks at the electric utility that it would be a lot safer to work on modern equipment rather than the 40-year-old stuff. So this is a big project, nearly $8 million, but it's a high priority. The intent is to get moving on that next year. Next slide, please. So E18 is the bioreactor aeration blower upgrades. Currently we have, 3 1,500 horsepower blowers. They're quite large. They would be, this probably the size of your office at City Hall. The blower machine is, and there's 3 of them. And our experience is that we're challenged on the turning down of the output of when we're operating on one blower. The demand for air changes with the load coming into the plant, and so on. There's a diurnal demand shift where, in the middle of the night we don't need as much air as during the day, and also different times of year when industries may not be processing vegetables, or when over holidays or long weekends, like around Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's, and a lot of large water users might shut down for a week or two, and people leave town and offices get closed. Then the demand on the plant goes down, and then so we need what we're looking for is the capacity, the ability to reduce the delivery of air where it's needed. The current configuration also challenges us when one blower isn't enough, and we have to start the second one. It's again a monster machine that gets started, across the line start that pulls a lot of power, and that affects our utility bill, our power bill, because we set new peak demands on the system. So the plan is to replace these, to have more smaller blowers, 5 or 6 blowers that are less than half the size of the current ones, so that to allow us more flexibility and to save some energy. Next slide, please. E23 is a UV disinfection upgrade. So these this will be this is really life cycle replacement. It doesn't have the regulatory nuance that the water plant project has. These the equipment at the wastewater plant is 5 years older than what we have at the water plant. We're looking at a replacement in 2025, at which point the equipment will be approaching 30 years of age, and the staff have already been alerted by the vendor that the replacement parts will start getting scarce. And so again, we're expecting some efficiencies from this as well, just with the newer ballasts and more efficient bulbs. Almost $3 million, and again, like it's in the towards the end of this cycle, so it's a 2025 start. Next slide, please. So E24 was in the previous CIP, the current CIP. We pushed it down the calendar. It's farther out. There's the bottom line on this is that when you remove phosphorus, when you use bacteria to remove phosphorus from the wastewater, it ends up inside the bacteria, inside the biosolids, that so that it doesn't go on to the river, and these those bug carcasses, or the sludge, ends up going to the digesters to be broken down, and then go out to the lagoon, where it's stockpiled and hauled off to farmers' fields. While at the lagoon, there's also some settling of those solids. The water on the top has, the engineers call that supernatant. It gets pulled back into the plant and retreated. That supernatant is very rich in phosphorus, and so we have a cycle where we're removing phosphorus from the wastewater as it comes in, but we're building it up and circulating it within the plant. And so this is to break that cycle of the phosphorus just going round and round. And when it reaches certain concentrations, we get a mineral deposit that we call struvite, which is, it's a crystal that's made up of phosphorus and ammonia and magnesium, and it'll form within pipes and in pumps and heat exchangers, and it's hard as a rock, and so it creates maintenance headaches at the plant. And so there's an operational maintenance goal here, which is the bottom line of managing the headache that is the struvite. And at the last cycle, when we talked to you about phosphorus recovery, the outcome of that project would have been described as fertilizer that was being made from the struvite that was being removed from this cycle. By pushing this farther down the calendar, it's an opportunity for us to explore other possibly lower cost alternatives to dealing with the problem. Keeping the goal in mind is not to become the supplier of fertilizer to golf courses necessarily, only if required. And so there are other processes that we'll be exploring that I'm hoping would cost us less in the end. So next slide, please. And so this is the last project is just lagoon upgrades. The lagoons were constructed in the 70s. They're experiencing some erosion on the banks from wind action and over the decades. And so this is that at this point the intent here is to rehab the existing structures. In the end, it may end up looking like an expansion in order to accommodate the operation while some of so we have somewhere to keep the sledge while we're up rehabbing the existing containment. Again, this one's out into the next cycle, and it's $5 million. Next slide. So this is the financial bottom line here. Again, there's the CIP as presented does not create any upward pressure on the rates within the next 6 years. We do, however, unlike at Hume Water, our 10-year plan does show at this point, some additional pressure out at some significant pressure out around year 7, 2028. On the graph, we're illustrating what a 3% rate increase applied to the operating budget to fund the increased borrowing would look like. That's just for illustrative purposes, so that you get a sense of the scale of that impact. It could be less, it could be more when that day comes. Okay, that's it. Next slide. Any questions?
Okay. Deputy Mayor Miyashiro.
Thanks, Mayor Spearman, and thanks again, Doug. For a couple of CIP discussions, we talked about the headworks and clarifiers and the difficulty it was to engineer those and get them online while keeping the wastewater plant running. From what you said earlier, that's online now, the new clarifiers.
Yes,
and headworks.
The project is complete. If the image on that last slide is actually one of those the two new primary clarifiers under construction, and so that whole system was commissioned during the pandemic last summer.
Okay, good. So then that was probably about a year or two past your projected time, right?
Oh yes, yeah.
Okay, but we're not dealing with that anymore now.
No, it won't show up. You won't see the word headworks for a while.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thanks, Doug, and I'm going to kind of miss Headworks Clarifier because I've been following it so passionately since 2003.
I know it's been a favorite.
It has been. It has been. I know where to find them for sure. Just back to phosphorus recovery. And again, did you, and I'm sorry, I'm taking notes here and I may have missed something. Again, this was E15 in the current CIP, $6 million, 2020 to 2022. Did you say didn't do it in this cycle?
That's correct. That no work was done on that.
Okay, so here's the fun part of governance. If I'm supposed to be doing due diligence on following these capital projects through and supporting you and supporting staff and helping to support the community, at some point a decision would have been made that this wasn't going to go ahead. So you've got the $2.6 million from accumulated surplus, which hasn't been spent. I'm assuming it's not been reallocated elsewhere because council hasn't put up their hand to do that to the best of my knowledge. But there was a decision not to go ahead with the project. Is there something we can do? And this is maybe not a conversation today, but I would love to have this conversation prior to the CIP. Is there something that we should be doing that comes back to the body that's put their hand up to say, let's do this, and says, we're taking it out of the CIP, just so that we know, because it does build in an immediate suspicion. Oh, well, Doug asked for $6 million 4 years ago, and he's back asking for it now. It makes it easier for us to understand what's been done and what's not been done. But somewhere along the line, somebody made the decision, we're not doing this between 2020 and 2022. That should have come to council for an amendment to the CIP then. And again, how that gets translated done, and I'll throw it out for all the Dougs to respond to. But I think Mr. Hawkins knows certainly where I'm going with this, and what can we do in process to close the loop on these things so that it makes it easier for us to understand.
Okay, and to the part of your question about reallocating different forms of cash in the context of some of those past projects. So that capital has been reallocated in the context of the plan you see today, and so on any of that capital that was consolidated from unspent under budget delivery of previous projects, or non-delivery of those previous projects, that that money hasn't been squirreled away or stashed. It shows up in the plan assigned to these projects you see today
for the proposed next cycle.
That's correct.
And
so that's when your hand goes up and the shuffle happens, rather than doing it piecemeal over the 4 years, or into the into the future, in collaboration with the finance department and Haley and Jennifer. We've identified those sources of funding that were available and applied them judiciously to this plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And it used to be, before we changed the policy, it used to be that following the CIP, we would have a raft of borrowing bylaws passed. We don't do that now. We are just passing things as we require them. Am I correct, Ms. Pinkson, on that?
Councillor Kaufman, no, we normally, after the CIP is approved, bring forward the resolutions to that based on, or bring forward the borrowing bylaws based on the CIP projects that are approved. And then we review those borrowing bylaws and have rescinded them in the past if they're not required, in terms of cleaning up what's maybe outstanding if there's a project that doesn't get started. And we also report out in the unaudited, which you'll see at council. My days are getting mixed together, I think on the 23rd. and there's the CIP summary in there as well that gives a status update on all of the CIP projects related to 2018 to 2027.
It doesn't give us a list of what debentures we've approved, but we haven't yet pulled, though, does it? See, and I thought we had the conversation about, we can do annual approvals, but doing them all at the beginning of the cycle means that there's a drawer full of approvals. Again, connecting the elected body to the finance. I'm glad we're repealing, because that's incredibly significant as well. But this is a broader conversation for a different time, and you and I can chat about this offline. But it's just back to the point then about the project was approved in 2017, and the decision was made to not do it, and that's the decision. It's utilities, it's technical, that's great. Money was reallocated elsewhere, that's fine. But it creates a cumbersome process, and it might just be me. And if it's just me, ... I'll mute from here. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thanks again, Doug, or Mr. Cope, for the information. A quick question. I do appreciate that there's the line item talks about effect on operating costs, and it zeros all along the way. Some of the projects you outlined, I'm thinking E19, E22, talked about energy savings, maintenance savings. I think you referred to E19 as the most maintained piece of equipment in Alberta, which is awesome. We do a good job of keeping things alive. I like it. But are there any savings associated with any of these projects, or are those savings eaten up by increased energy costs, wages, et cetera, et cetera? It's
to identify savings related to these investments is really challenging. If even your residential power bill will demonstrate that there's a lot of fixed costs that you can't affect by changing a light bulb. So by in the context of these savings, they're not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're typically smaller small expectations in the context of the $2 million power line item in the operating budget. But it's also difficult for me to convert that electricity usage into actual dollars, because it's not that easy of a process to identify. So we can cut our energy use by 20%, but my power bill is going to go down by 3% or 2% or something like that. So it's in practice, it's easier for me to experience that in real life, in real time, and make adjustments to the operating budget to provide relief in the context of other pressures in the whole picture of operating the wastewater treatment plant, than to make you a promise that the payback is 5 years, and then Haley will adjust my operating budget according to my promise, and then I'll not be able to afford to do the work. So it's just not that simple. And in the context of maintenance, the cost of maintenance is people and parts, and it'll freeze up capacity to maintain other equipment when they won't be sitting around wondering what to do when that machine stops needing work.
Thanks, Mr. Kalpa. I don't think Haley was listening at that point, so you're okay.
Okay, I see no further questions in the queue from council, so I will thank Mr. Kaup for his presentation today and for the information. It's a relief to know there's no pressure in the next 4 years on water rates or wastewater, but we note beyond that there could be some pressures arising, so thank you.
All right, thank you.
Is there, at this point, is there a motion? Or do we just move on to waste and recycling? This one. Okay. I have a resolution from Councillor Carlson. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Committee receive the report and presentation as information for water and wastewater CIP 2022 to 2031 projects. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Appreciate all the work put in and the presentation to the committee so far, and I'd ask for my colleagues' support.
Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that carries unanimously. We'll now move on to waste and recycling, and we'll invite Mr. Joel Sanchez to present. Welcome, Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'm here today to talk, as Doug did, on the capital improvement program for the waste and recycling utility. So if we, just gonna go on the slide, if next, please. So the Waste and Recycling Utility develops most of our capital projects at the Waste and Recycling Center, what it was formerly known as the landfill. And some of the projects that we have, they include the collection of the waste from resident households. And a good example of that one is the CIP that we did during this past cycle on the Curbside Recycling program. And next. Yeah, if you can go next, one more slide. Yeah, one more. So most of the work that we perform at the Waste and Recycling Center is done through the guidelines and the regulations of Alberta Environment and Parks, which sets out the approval for the Waste and Recycling Center to operate the landfill and all the facilities we have at the site. If you click next, please. So most of the work that happens at the Waste and Recycling Center includes the two areas that I have on the presentation right now. So if you look at the red area, that's the existing footprint of the landfill and the operations that we have. And the area that is included in the green highlight, that's the future expansion. And that's where we currently have some operations like the PDO, the CDO, construction drop-off, the compost pad for the yard waste. And we also have the material recovery facility within that green area. On a typical year, we receive around 120,000 tons of waste. And on this side, we got the approval in 2016 for the next 10 years to operate. And that approval include the two areas that I'm showing on this slide. Another regulatory requirement for us, or a council-approved policy that we follow, is the waste diversion policy, which is in place to ensure that we can divert as much or as many materials as we can from the landfill in order to preserve the life of the site. Next. So I'm going to be talking a little bit today about the two types of projects that we're going to be putting forward. The first project that we have is the recycling projects, which is the E7, and it includes the Curbside Organics program. And the remaining projects are within the category of the landfill projects. Those are E7, which is, E8, the disposal cell development and closure, E9, landfill gas and leachate management system, E10, the site enhancements, and E11, sustainability enhancements. Next. So let's talk a little bit about the recycling projects. Next, please. So in November 28 of 2016, City Council approved the Curbside Recycling Program as part of the resolution that was passed on that day. Administration was asked that following the implementation of the Curbside Recycling Program, to prepare for Council consideration a program implementation for the Curbside Organics for the residential side. On October 7, 2019, Administration presented a plan for the Curbside Organics Program, and at the time, Council resolved that Administration should include options for the Curbside Organics project during the next CIP, and that's why we're here today. This Curbside Organics program will include the service to over 34,000 single-family dwelling units and 7,500 multifamily dwelling units for the Curbside Organics program. The materials that are going to be included is food waste and jar waste, and the project will include the design and construction of a compost facility for the residential sector, the collection trucks that will be used in order to provide the service, and the green carts and the bins that are going to be used for the residential, for the single family and multifamily residences. Next. So back in 2019, when the first proposal or implementation plan was presented to City Council, the city hired Ipsos Reid to perform a survey to Lethbridge residents about their perception on the residential organics collections. Some of the highlights of the survey was that 81% of the respondents thought that it was very important to have a program for food and jar waste diversion. At the same time, we asked what was their opinion about if the city should invest more or the same in a Curbside Organics program. And the answer was that 87% of the residents had an opinion that the city should invest more or at least the same in the organics program. In another question that we asked was if they were interested about an organics program, and we separated that question between the jar waste and the food waste. And as you can see here, overall, around 62% of the residents were interested in having a program for curbside organics for the residents. Next. Next slide. So if we talk a little bit about the purpose and justification of this project, we have the waste diversion policy, as I mentioned before, with 50% waste diversion target for 2021. And up to 2020, the number of the diversion percentage for the residents has been 35%. So only with the introduction of a Curbside Organics program, we will be able to achieve the target. Most likely not for 2021, but at least for the subsequent years. And for sure, we're also going to be aligned with the 2030 targets, where we are expecting to achieve a 65% diversion for the residents of the city. Another benefit that we have into this project, again, is greenhouse gas reduction. So by moving these organics from the landfill, that means that in the long term, the city will have a benefit of generating less greenhouse gas and also generating less leachate, which is the liquid that is generated at landfills, and we have to treat it. We have to make sure that that leachate doesn't go to places that we don't want to. Again, another another important factor on this project is that when we implemented curbside recycling back in 2019, garbage was moved to a bi-weekly service. With the introduction of the Curbside Organics program, this will help alleviate some of the issues that are present for some residents with the bi-weekly garbage, since all the junk factor or those materials that are going to generate odors during the 2 weeks will be moved to a Curbside Organics program. The plan that we have at this point for the Curbside Organics program is that it will go on a weekly basis during the summer, and during the winter, the service will be scaled back to a bi-weekly service. Because again, there is less jar waste. During the winter, it's not as hot, and the materials won't generate that odor that is becoming an issue. Also, if you look at the chart that we have on this slide, based on the latest audits that we have done, we still have 51% of organics materials on the black card. So again, that's the target that we want to make sure we capture. Currently, we collect around 21,000 tons of materials on the black card every year. So if we do a quick math, we have a chance to divert 12,000 tons from the landfill into the compost facility. This project has a total cost of $10.6 million, and it's also important to mention that the utility rate increase, if this project is approved, will be $7 a month per household for the residents of the city. Next. So I'm going to be talking now about the landfill projects, or all those projects that are happening at the Waste and Recycling Center, and that are related either to landfill, to hydrovac facilities, to the compost facility, etc. Next. One more slide. Yeah, one more. Yeah. Okay, the first project in the landfill is E8, which is the disposal cell development and closure. As you can see here in the picture, we have a total of 7 different areas that are included in this project. Number 1, 2, 5, and 7 are located in the active landfill cells. And this includes contaminated soil cells, side liners. Just a little bit of background, every time we do a cell at the landfill, the way we do the work is that we excavate sometimes up to 90 feet. And then when we excavate to allow for the space for the waste to be disposed, we build side liners every year, 1 or 2 meters of side liners to protect the groundwater and to protect the elements from the waste once it's deposited into the landfill. These side liners, as soon as we finish filling that height, we need to build more side liners. So this is a continuous program in order to operate the cells, and that's part of the work that is included into this proposal. In addition to that, there might be an enhancement on this hydrovac cell that is being built. So if we need to add more capacity, or the other factor that we have is that we are looking into expanding one of the area, and that's considering the future for the next 4 years in the CIP, and that's why it's included here. Surface water management, this is something that we have to do as per the approval to operate, similar to the side liners. We have to make sure that we redirect the water away from the landfill in order to generate less leachate and actually have a good surface water management on the site. Another item that is included here is the landfill approval renewal. As I mentioned at the very beginning, in 2016, we received the approval for the next 10 years. And this is typically a work that takes somewhere between 4 to 2 years to complete. We have to do a master plan for the site. We have to do a consultation, engagement, the application to the regulator. So the plan is that in 2024, or 2023, we're going to start the work in order to have the renewal for the landfill from 2026 up to 2036. And the last item here is that with all the work that we have been doing in order to divert material from the landfill, there is a need to have a material processing area where we can actually, those materials that are being diverted, we can do a processing for them and we can actually recycle those materials. This project has a total cost of $7.1 million, and the operating cost per year, the increase to the operating cost will be $100,000 a year. Next slide. So a little bit about the project again. I already covered this area about how much waste is being deposited on the site. And again, we need to make sure the picture here is an example of what I was talking before. You see how deep these cells are being built. And then as we fill that area, we start building the side liners that I mentioned before. And we have to make sure we have a water management system in place in order to avoid water going and running down through the active phase of the landfill and having a good management of the site. Next slide. So the next project that is being proposed is E9, which again is a continuation of the previous E8 CIP for the landfill gas and leachate management. The landfill gas plant, which is the yellow area on the top of the top left corner picture, is being built in 2021. So we started this project last year, and during the summer of this year, the plant and the stack and the collection system will be in place. Now the next step is that as we build more cells, we also need to extend the landfill gas collection system. This is part of the regulatory requirements that we have with the AEP. And in this project, we're going to be building new risers and new wells in order to capture the landfill that is going to be generated once we do partial closure or full closures of the cell. The other project that is included on E9 is the leachate management system. Again, these two items are hand in hand. So in the active landfill, there is a production of greenhouse gases, and there is also leachate. The leachate, the plan is right now we recirculate, but we have been in conversation with the regulator, and the idea is to have a better process and treatment for the leachate. And the plan is to have a leachate management system that will either include the treatment on site or the disposal of the leachate at the wastewater treatment plant. Next slide. So when we look at the justification of this project, we currently generate 87,000 tons per year of greenhouse gas at the landfill. The specified gas reporting regulation that is in place has a limit of 100,000 tons per year. Once we pass that threshold, that means that we will need to pay carbon offset credits for any amount that is in excess of the 100,000. The idea with the landfill gas is that we can capture this gas and then flare it and reduce our generation and therefore avoid going into a market where we will need to pay for the generation of greenhouse gases. In addition to this, we have a project in the process right now where we can actually apply for the carbon offset credits, which is we can, depending on the project and the amount of greenhouse gas that we're capturing and by the meter, how the quantification of the quantity, we can apply and get a rebate that currently is $40 per ton. It will become in June of this year. And the federal government has also announced plans to increase this to $50 per ton next year or the year after. So this additional revenue will allow us in the future to actually offset some of the cost for future installations of landfill gas equipment. It's not a huge amount, but at least it will help us in order to mitigate the environmental liabilities that we have with the greenhouse gas. And again, this project is aligned with the environmental policy in order to avoid gas and leachate environmental implications. The net increase for the operating cost for this project is $100,000 a year. Next slide. One more. Okay, and this is the last project that we are proposing. No, sorry, this is the second last project we're proposing for the site. It is the site enhancements. And this is a project for different work that we have to do at the Waste and Recycling Center in order to offer the services to the residents and our customers. This project includes the Waste and Recycling Center roads and parking areas. So as we build new cells, we also have to create roads to access those ones. We also have a need for traffic management to accommodate the growth and the traffic flow. We added the material recovery facility, and the traffic through the scale house has been increasing. And even on Saturdays, we have the free Saturday program. Some days the line to get to the site, they go up to the county road. And that's an issue that we currently have, and we have been working with the county in order to avoid that situation because it disrupts the traffic on the area. So this project is including the addition of another lane in the inbound and outbound scale for 2022 or 2023. And that will help us as well to manage growth at the site, especially considering that the hydrovac facility is being built this year. And the ICI compost facility is also being built. So there will be more traffic through the site, and this will help us to manage the traffic. And the last item that is included on the site enhancements is, as we all know, Lethbridge is a windy city. And as part of the approval that we have with AEP, every time that the wind is over 70 kilometers per hour, we are required to shut down the face of the landfill to avoid litter on the site and for neighbors around the area. So we typically build every year, if you see the yellow lines on the top picture, those are fences that are going to be built as we span the site and as we do new cells. These fences are in place in order to avoid material to go beyond our footprint and goes into the neighbors' areas. Today, what happens when we have a release is that we have a staff and we have to send them to clean the litter that has escaped the site. And the idea is to avoid this from happening and make sure we meet all the regulations that we have with AEP. Next slide. And on some of the justifications and the purpose of this project is also we are planning to grow beyond just disposal. It's not about disposing, it's also making this facility a better experience for the customers. The top picture that you see there is what we call the public drop-off. And on the back of the public drop-off is the commercial drop-off. So these facilities were built in the past few years within the past CIP in order to avoid residents and customers going to the face and being in the same place with heavy equipment and big trucks from the commercial customers. So this make it easier for them in order to have a program to divert different materials. In the CDO, we have an area for hazardous waste, for paint, for oil. There is also a recycling area for excess materials. And on the CDO is where we have been working with the ICI, and we have our department, the ICI group, has done a great job. And we have been able to divert shingles, drywall, wood from the landfill, and this material is now being separated. So again, it's all about making it better in order to create a diversion process and also meet the requirements that we have with the regulator. Next slide. So this is now, yes, the last project that we are proposing, and it's a new category called sustainability enhancements. And I know there was a question before from Councillor Kaufman about what are we doing and what is the corporate approach in terms of a solar strategy. Can we have programs in place? And Doug mentioned before, Council will be seeing in the next 3 weeks a presentation with the results of the Energy Conservation Master Plan, or Energy Efficiency as it was formerly known. And this program has some projects that have been identified. There was an assessment of the whole city, opportunities for improvement. And as part of the CAP that we're proposing, we are proposing to have a solar panel at the Waste and Recycling Center, solar panel facility, in order to offset energy consumption at the site. And some of the projects that will be benefit from this, that we could actually use the energy generated by the solar panels, are the future compost pad or facility for the residents, the ICI compost area that is being built for the ICI sector, and the landfill gas generation. Again, all the blowers, all the equipment there. We're exploring the opportunity to actually power all that with the energy that is being generated by the solar power. In addition to this, we will be doing some energy audits in some of the waste and recycling buildings and some of the energy efficiency initiatives that are being proposed. So this is $1.1 million that is being proposed in order to generate these projects. Next slide. So again, the purpose and justification is to implement recommendations from Energy Conservation Master Plan, reduce our environmental impact, walk the talk, demonstrate that this is possible. And in the Waste and Recycling Utility, we have these projects in order to do the pilot and then try to expand this program across the corporation. And the additional benefit that we have here, as I mentioned before, we're currently working in the emission offset system. So by generating the solar panels, by generating electricity, we have an opportunity to reduce the carbon footprint for the Waste and Recycling Center, which will allow us to access credit that we can use to reinvest in additional projects. In addition to this, there is a grant or a program by the province that we will be able to access and get additional funding. It is important to mention that if additional funding is secure, we should be able to come back to City Council and actually do an amendment of this CIP if we secure additional funding to come back and add more projects if we have a source to fund the projects. Next slide. So here is the graph, as Doug has mentioned before. This is the debt servicing graph for the landfill. And this includes all the projects that are being proposed in the next 4 years. As Doug mentioned before, we have projects also that they go up to the 10-year long range, but we're seeking approval only for the first 4 years. For the benefit of council, we are highlighting here all the 10 years and where we sit in regards to capital payment capacity. There is an important item that we need to mention here is that the landfill utility fee currently sits at $1.50 per month. And as part of this CIP proposal, we are recommending to City Council that this fee will can be reduced effective in 2022 to $1 a month, which is a 50-cent reduction on residents' utilities starting next year if this CIP is approved. Next slide. And again, this is just a summary of all the projects that are being proposed, either on the recycling side or the landfill projects. Next. So let's talk a little bit about the rates, how the CIP that is being proposed affect the rates. So the Curbside Organics program will have a rate increase of $7 per month per dwelling unit for residential customers. And that will be starting in 2023 if this project is approved. For the landfill utility charge, this will be a reduction of the fee. Instead of $1.50 a month, that is the current charge, this fee will be reduced to $1 a month in 2022. And as part of the CIP that is being proposed, there is no changes to the tipping fees for the landfill for the next years. And with that, I close, and if you have any questions, we'll be more than happy to answer them.
Yes, there are questions from council. Acting Mayor Higgin?
Thank you, Mayor Spearman, and thank you very much, Joel, for that presentation. Just wonder if you can go back to the slide when you did the survey, right at the beginning when you were talking about organics. And while it's coming up, I noticed that you're speaking about the support for this. That there's, those that actually I'd like to see the slide up there first, because if you've got it. I think you said just $7 a month was, survey where it had the numbers of, just looking through my notes here to see, here. So opinions on investment. So when you had the same or less, now the same, was there a question in the survey saying that, okay, you want to be the same, but there's going to be $7 per month additional charge, equipment, bins, all of those costs in there? Was that part of the survey? Or was it just, if it's kept at the same amount, that would mean the same amount that we're currently paying, so that they're okay with that, correct?
Yeah, and again, when the question was asked here was about the interest about the program. You're currently right. There was no question about, at the time when we did the survey, we didn't have all the program developed. So that could be a follow-up again. That could be a question that could be asked. And it's probably important to know. What we asked at the time is, what do you think? Is it important to have a food and yard waste diversion program? And that was the question that was asked. And the second one is, what is your opinion on the investment? Shall the city invest more, the same, less, or they didn't have an answer? So that's the result that we like here.
Okay, and that's where I'm just, I guess my question would be, there's obviously if someone said, Blaine, would you like a brand new house? I would say yes, but you have to pay for it? No. So having that in the survey is extremely pertinent in my mind, because the decision to have curbside organics is, I think it should be 100% if there's not going to be a cost. But I'm concerned on how this survey was done without having some of the more important questions of, it's going to be a cost to it. Do you also support it if you're going to have to pay $7 plus taxation or from the utility fees of X amount for the next how many years? And so I just want to touch on that. And so thank you very much for that answer.
Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Carlson?
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thank you, Mr. Sanchez, for the information and presentation. On the CIP sheets, you have listed estimated greenhouse gas emissions as a line item. First question, are those are negative numbers, correct?
That's correct. That's a reduction in the greenhouse gas, yes.
Thank you. I didn't want them to be seen that that's how much extra we're going to be producing. Those are capture, and so maybe that needs to be shown. Just a comment on that. I appreciate seeing that, and perhaps that could be a line item in every project we do through the corporation. That's maybe the city manager or Mr. Hawkins, so that when we're contemplating new projects, we have an idea of whether they're adding to or in these cases, taking away from our contribution there. So I appreciate seeing that, but I think we need to make sure those are negatives. Question around, I've got quite a few questions, so I can hop out at any point, Mayor Spearman. On E7, I'm sorry, I've got so many different presentations, et cetera, open. E7, oh, that's the curbside. In your presentation, I think it was in slide 6, I'm sorry, I think it was, it talked about frequency, and I think you mentioned it would be bi-weekly?
Yes, what the way we are proposing the program to be implemented is weekly during the summer and bi-weekly during the winter.
Okay, thank you for that. And I just, maybe it's just different for me, but when you show the photo of the cart and the percentages of the waste that are in that cart. It's shocking to me. Our family, we put out our, that's the one, thank you. We put out our black bin maybe once every 6 weeks, and even then it's half full. Our recycling bin is full continually. But my organics, I do have a composter, and full disclosure, we're vegan, so we don't have a lot of animal waste. But my composter has taken all of our kitchen organics for the last 15 years. I've never had any waste. And I'm just wondering, is there a way to achieve the same targets and the same goals without having to collect and truck and create greenhouse gases by that? I know we've done it before. We put out compost bins for folks. That's where I got mine. I think it was $15 at that time. But that has solved all my my kitchen waste. Yard waste, I take advantage of the sites. I do. But I also don't collect grass clippings or anything like that. Just leave them on the lawn. Have we ever explored alternate ways to reach the same targets, but incentivize the individual residents to achieve those targets? Or does that just not work?
No, that's an excellent question. The answer to that question will be yes. What we have done in the past is we do the campaigns where we sold and promote the composters, and even the composters are sold with a discount. The city pays a price and they are offered to the residents at a lower price in order to incentive their use. And we also have a staff that they attend different events across the city trying to promote how to use the composters and promote this as much as we can. But the reality is that I will say that I have to say that I'm really impressed with how you say that you guys are setting out every 6 weeks. The majority of the households, even recently with some technology that we have in place, they generate somewhere between 25 to 30 kilograms per every pickup collection on the black cart. And the black cart are typically, the set out for them is typically over 85, 90%, which means they put it every week, most of the residents. And on the waste audits, we have done a few since 2019 up to last year. We have seen consistent number on the organics. The organics are typically somewhere between 45 up to 58%, which is a lot. And even trying to incentivize, are there any other ways? The yard waste sites are there again, and they are very well used by the residents, but it's still not enough. And it's the convenience factor that makes a really huge difference. And we saw that with the recycling program. When we implemented the recycling program, we double or 2.5 more collection what we used to do with the depots, right? So again, by having the convenience for the residents to have that service provided to their household, that's where you see the achievement of those targets that we currently have. And it's not only for us, but it has been happening in any other communities. The only way they can achieve this is by having the 3 streams. So where it's convenient for the people to go there and use the cart, put it in the curb, and then it's gone. They forget about it.
Okay, well, thank you. I guess we are outliers because that breakdown is just shocking to me, but it is what it is. In E9, which may tie into E11 as well, you talked about flaring some of the gases. And then in E11, I think it talked about recovering heat. And in fact, I'll just let Miss Pinkson know in the sheets on E11, there's a misspelling. I'm assuming the word heat was supposed to be there instead of here capture, I think it's called. But it's, I think it was heat capture is what was meant for. So is that what is being considered? Is that flaring will produce the heat capture to help? Is that what I'm seeing? Is that the connection?
So that's an excellent question, because this is how the program is going to work. The first 2 years, we're going to be flaring the gas that we collect from the landfill. And this process will allow us to do an analysis on the quantity, on the quality of the gas, and how much are we generating at the landfill. Once that period is passed, the next step for the project will be to do the utilization, which means that we can now decide if we have enough, there are different options. One option will be to put that gas into the grid with either ATCO gas or whatever. So again, that will be an additional revenue. Another option will be to use it to power trucks with the natural gas, with the RNG. So instead of using diesel, we can use the RNG in order to power the trucks. And the other option is to use it for heating at the site, right? At the Waste and Recycling Center, we have a MRF, we have other areas, other buildings, the waste transfer station, and that RNG can be used in order to transfer. So again, that's the link between E11, where if the landfill gas, we have enough and the quality is there, then we can go and create additional projects that are going to have sustainability benefits.
Okay, so thank you for that. So the first 2 years, I don't want to say the gas will just be wasted, but it'll be for monitoring purposes, so we can then find the best way to utilize, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And that's also a requirement from the regulator. We have to make sure that the process is stable before we go to the next step.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Thank you. We have Kathleen Shepherd online, and she would like to speak as well. Ms. Shepherd?
Hello, thank you for giving me a few minutes on the agenda. I wanted to speak today on behalf of Environment Lethbridge's Wasteless Committee, which is a committee of community members that are focused on waste reduction in Lethbridge. And specifically, I want to speak in support of CIP Project E7, which is the Curbside Organics program. And apologize if some of my notes sort of repeat what Mr. Sanchez has already said, but I think, as we are all aware, the implementation of curbside recycling in 2019 has had quite a positive impact on Lethbridge's waste diversion. We've seen a 24% reduction in household waste, which is really encouraging and I think commendable. But as the graphics show, more than 50% of the current residential waste stream is now coming from compostable organic material. And so Environment Lethbridge and Wasteless really believe that a curbside organics collection program will cause further reductions in the waste stream and will move the city closer to meeting the diversion targets adopted in Council's waste diversion policy. The environmental benefits, I think, are clear, both from things like reducing amounts of greenhouse gases and leachates in the landfill, but also economically extending the life of the landfill, which I think is of benefit to the city as a whole. Over the past couple of years, Wasteless has focused on education efforts around reducing food waste, encouraging residents to take a number of proactive measures to reduce their food waste throughout everything from shopping to storage to kind of reduce those efforts. But we recognize that education on its own is not enough. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that at the end of the day, 40% of the food waste is simply inedible. It's things like chicken bones and orange peels and those kind of things. And so those have to be dealt with in one manner or another. So even if everybody did their absolute best, which as much as I like to believe that day would come, is probably unlikely, there would still be organics in the waste stream. Dealing with organics is an issue that Environment Lethbridge hears about pretty frequently, probably more frequently than a lot of other issues. And it's one of those issues that we often can't give good solutions to people. Not everyone is in a position to have a backyard composter. A lot of people don't have backyards, so that eliminates that potential right off the top. And having a composter takes a certain skill or effort. Am I frozen? Hopefully not. And so as with the blue bins, convenience is key. So we believe that a residential organics program would solve this problem for residents and ensure that the city meets its waste reduction targets. Thank you very much for giving me the time.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Shepherd? I see none. We certainly appreciate the work that Environment Lethbridge does. We did receive your letter prior to the meeting, and thank you for your input and everything you do to support reduction of waste in our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. I hope Ms. Shepherd hasn't fled yet. I did have a question, but sorry, I had to run away from my computer for a second. Ms. Shepherd, are you still around? If I could ask a question, Your Worship.
I am still here, yeah.
Oh, thank you, Kathleen. I agree to appreciate the work you and your organization does in the community. Same question I asked Mr. Sanchez. Are there ways we can work with the community? You said, composting, et cetera, requires a certain skill or dedication to do it. Does your group provide any assistance to those folks who may be interested but aren't quite sure how?
Yeah, we certainly try, and I think the city's program in that area is a really great one. As you say, it's easy to get a composter. It's low cost. I believe the nice utilities folks will deliver it to you. So, the city staff do various workshops, and we partner on those things as well. So I think that's a great program. The only caution I have is that it's sort of limited at the end of the day in the uptake, just from practical considerations, I think. Same goes with the yard waste sites. The people who use them, I think, are really happy with them, but convenience is a factor, just like with the blue bins. One of the reasons that Wasteless really focused on sort of more than composting was to try and encourage some of that source food waste things. Everybody has the squishy cucumber in the back of their fridge, and so how do you get your planning and your storage and all those kind of things to prevent it from even needing to be composted? So trying to focus throughout the food pathway, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Thanks, and I've appreciated it. I think I've seen some of the commercials, etc. In fact, one of my neighbors down the block, I think, is one of the main actors, Andy. Yes, so I've seen all those. What's the uptake on those in the community? Do you keep track of stats of how many people view them, how many people contact you and say, "I'd like to do more, do better"? Do you have any idea of
we do have stats on the videos, and we got quite a good response on those. I think they were kind of a nice humorous note for a lot of people. So, I think at the end of the day, I don't have the numbers quite right in front of me, but we had thousands of people who viewed those videos. So it was a good way to sort of pique some interest, and we keep similar stats on website and that kind of thing. We don't track particularly the number of inquiries around certain topics and that kind of thing, but dealing with organics is a common query. People are sort of like, particularly people who have come here from somewhere else that had a program are like, what do I do now? So yeah, it is something that I would say comes up fairly frequently.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Shepherd. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Shepherd, when's Environment Week this year?
Environment Week is the first week of June, so we haven't quite started planning that, but CD Saturday is coming up the 22nd to the 27th, and we have a number of workshops on the go, including one on composting. So. Okay,
so we don't have a theme yet for Environment Week, so.
We do not, no.
Okay, well, community education on organics might be timely.
It sounds like a good idea for sure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Any further questions from council? I see none, so I have a resolution moved by Councillor Carlson. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee receive the report and presentation on waste and recycling utility CIP 22 to 2031 projects as information. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Again, just to thank Mr. Sanchez, his team, and Ms. Shepherd for the presentations, and I'd ask for my colleagues' support.
Okay, Question has been called. All in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move on to 4.3. Economic Standing Policy Committee recommend that Council adopt. Someone needs to propose an option of the proposed budget transition process options for the capital improvement program and operating budget. Is there a councillor who wishes to propose a motion?
I believe Haley had a presentation to take us through. I think there was 3 options presented, if I recall.
All right. Okay, let's do the presentation, then the motion might make more sense. Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome, Ms. Pinkson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman, members of Economic SPC. I just wanted to walk through the proposed budget option presentation. If you just move to the next slide, it includes the City Council resolution from February 24th, and it highlights several things to consider. Opportunity looking at updating the next council with the election term of 2021 to 2025, some sort of update related to or reconsideration related to Section D projects. It looked at the option of a transition process to reorient the budget so that CIP is deliberated first. It asked for us to come back. We missed the December 14th deadline with some of the operational budget reviews that was going on at that time, so we're back today to provide some options to council. And if you just jump to the next slide, we often include this slide just talking about what is a CIP, and then the following slide just includes the information about why we do one. The following slide is just the current process, walking through. Just wanted to highlight a few things in terms of the operating impact from the CIP flows into the operating budget, trying to demonstrate a visual of kind of what that process looks like with budget deliberations, the budget cycles, as well as when the election falls, in terms of the 4-year council terms, just kind of demonstrating how that process works. A lot of the other factors that we play in or consider through this process is just efficiencies of contracting. The community kind of has an expectation of how much is what projects are approved over the 4-year window. Just the opportunity for resource planning and project planning, as well as taking advantage of kind of competitive pricing related to multi-year contracts. We've also been able to kind of have projects at different stages of the CIP, some in planning, some in preliminary design, some in construction, which helps when the other levels of government provide stimulus funding or are looking for shovel-ready projects, or I think they now call it worthy-ready projects. And then this is a 4-year approval within a 10-year plan. Slide following the visual is just a summary of some of the information that I talked about in words as opposed to visual, and so some people just to kind of give some options for when the presentation was being reviewed. If you jump to the next slide, just wanted to highlight some of the CIP updates that are brought to council or a committee, depending on timing. So when there is a new council, we do some sort of council orientation related to CIP and the financial information about the city. We provide project status updates in the annual and audited report, as well as in the June operating forecast. If there are CIP amendment requirements, we bring those individual projects to council for scope and cost changes. Obviously through the CIP, there's updates in terms of project status, and anytime there's a grant opportunity or stimulus funding, which council will recall last year, obviously there were some opportunities there. We brought forward projects, opportunities related to connected to the CIP. And then through master planning and community engagement, projects are either identified or provided information on. The next slide is just a recommendation from the governance review in terms of yearly operating and capital budget check-ins. Haven't had the opportunity to connect with economic on this yet, just in terms of what are potential gaps related to what we provide today versus what yearly check-ins would look like on a go-forward basis. So this is obviously something that we'll need to bring back to economic or governance, depending on the direction of council or SPCs, about where we want to have that conversation, just to get some greater clarity about what yearly check-ins actually means and what additional information is maybe required. On the next slide, just wanted to highlight the Kpmg operational reviews. Has some also related to capital project planning, broader than just the CIP in terms of project planning from, you know, the initial stage of an idea to the completion of a construction. So obviously components of that relate to the CIP, but this would be kind of more broader project planning recommendations that we're currently reviewing or looking at options in terms of development or implementation. So on the next slide is the first option. This one would identify a Section D update to the new council in terms of the direction in the resolution. Just some considerations in this instance is the CIP update would obviously provide new council in advance of budget deliberations any operating impact based on decisions made by the previous council. There's obviously an additional opportunity to review and make adjustments if it's required. This would align well with the budget check-ins from the governance review, and as well as timing of in terms of the alignment with the city council strategic plan. It looks like there's questions. I think it's probably simpler if I go through the rest of the options, but I'll leave that up to Mayor Spearman. Is that okay, or do you want me to pause at this point?
I can wait to the end for mine.
Okay.
I can wait to the end as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Please
Thank you.
continue.
So then the next slide is just a summary of some of those items that I just highlighted. So then if you go to option 2, this would be adding in a 2-year transition process of both operating and capital in order to reorient the budgets for the next council to deliberate the CIP at the beginning of the term and then the operating budget. Just some considerations for this is it would orient the budget so that the CIP is deliberated first. City Council will approve an operating budget for the next council, so there's some challenges with that. The 2-year operating and capital transition period, obviously there potentially could be some challenges with just planning and construction cycle of CIP projects, given that projects are typically greater than 2 years. And also then there would be some resource capacity in terms of a transition period of doing multiple operating budgets in the 2021 to 2025 council term. The next slide is obviously just again a summary of that information that we just talked about. So if you move to option 3, this would be deliberating the capital and operating budget in the same year. CIP would occur in May, and then the operating budget would be approved in November. Just some things to consider. We would reorient the budget so that CIP would be deliberated first, and then operating budget would be deliberated shortly thereafter. The decisions are made and executed in the same term. It would align with the timing of council's strategic plan. Both the operating budget and the capital budgets would occur in the same year, which would certainly cause some capacity issues and potential financial impact in terms of resources. And we would require a transition period to approve essentially a 2-year CIP for this current council to then transition to another CIP in the next council term to kind of realign everything in terms of timing. So the next slide is obviously a summary of the information I just talked about, and then the last slide is just a discussion, questions, and conversation.
Okay. Questions? Councillor Carlson?
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thank you, Ms. Pinkson, for the information and explanation. Perhaps I'll just ask a couple quick questions. The proposed option 1, it talks about section D update. I'm assuming that because section D is the one that really has the largest impact on taxation and operating costs. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Transportation also has some impact on operating costs, so that might be something else that if option 1 was chosen, those sections of transportation that have budgetary impacts for operating budget may want to be added. That's my only comment there. So thank you for that. Option 2, lots of challenges in the 2021-2025 cycle. I get it during a transition. I do kind of like the fact that it gives the incoming council a couple of years to sort of figure things out and get up to speed before they have to make the big decisions on the CIP and operating budget. But I'll be honest, my mind at first blush, looking from a totally council-centric point of view, is option 3. And can you maybe explore a bit more some of the challenges that you mentioned on option 3? I'm looking at the benefits of it. Maybe help me with some of the challenges.
Absolutely. So, Councillor Carlson, just given that the operating budget would occur and the capital budget would occur in the same year, would just the result would be some challenges to resourcing. So currently our budget team, which is very, very small, supports also does a number of year-end transactions that occurs. And so from a resource perspective, it will be very challenging to address CIP, year-end, and essentially operating budget all at the same time because, you know, just in terms of gathering and when decisions are made and when reports need to be brought forward. We have looked at other municipalities, and most municipalities that do them at the same time there's often a dedicated budget team that is strictly all that they do, which gives some relief in terms of the overlap of year-end and the 2 budgets going on, and just the ability to kind of gather. This year has put, I need to be perfectly honest, put some significant strain on the staff and the amount of things that are going on currently in these first few months of 2021 in terms of the operating budget review, budget reductions, that we're working on CIP, and they're also doing year-end all at the same time. And there's some pretty significant pressures on our team, and I need to recognize that they have been working extremely hard, and this level of intensity is not sustainable in terms of how it's set up today. And I am concerned about that level of effort on an ongoing basis.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate your honesty because, as I said, I was looking at completely selfishly council lens. And I think we sometimes forget that our decisions and our wishes have impacts throughout the organization. So thank you for your honesty on that. Thank you, Mayor Spearman. That's all the questions I had.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thank you, Haley, for the presentation and the information, the considerations. Looking through it, selfishly is one word. Looking at it through the eyes of good governance is another way to actually consider it. And I think everybody in council recognizes the challenges that COVID has placed on you and your staff for sure. The fact that we did the budget update in November, you're into year end and all of these other pressures. So if we're establishing a system that helps the governing body govern and does it in a way that we are not disconnected or removed from the budget, the first question I would have then is, what would you need in order to be able to provide greater support for council when it comes to option 3, which I think would be the start of the third option for council?
We've just kind of started to look at what that might look like. And so depending on what council's consideration is, I would need to go away and do some more work in terms of the impact of that to come back with kind of dollar impact, because I just haven't had a chance to kind of explore what the resource capacity would be of option 3. But initially, it would require essentially, in my opinion, kind of two budget teams in terms of supporting each stream. The other thing to consider is that the business unit managers that support the operating budget process also support the CIP process. They're the same people, and so there is certainly I would need to kind of expand that out and do some more research in terms of what that might look like in terms of impact to the whole organization.
So to paraphrase, we govern based on a system, a setup, a way that we do things, as opposed to we set up a system based on the way we govern. It's not a critique or criticism, but we're responding based on how we have the organization aligned or responsive to, it's the way we operate. And so the result of that is information comes to council, or council's decision capacity is limited based on the way that we're organized. And I see the CAO has popped on my screen.
Yeah, if I could just jump in there, I think how I would describe that is we have a staffing structure and processes in place based on the current approach to budgeting.
Yep.
So to Haley's point, the past 6 months from the time the expenditure reduction exercise started until now, and the next 3 or 4 months are going to put a lot of strain on the organization because we've had to shift and operate outside of outside of the process that we had established, and we're staffed to support. So what I wanted to say was, we can do absolutely anything council wants. So this should be driven by the process council wants to see in place to exercise fiscal governance. Absolutely. What we would need to do, as Haley said, is go away and look, very, very carefully at that and make sure that we staff the organization to deliver that. But I certainly think that can be done.
Yeah, that's why I start with this question is recognizing, as previous speakers said, for the purpose of governance, there is a certain way that we should be doing this, but we recognize that there is pressure on the organization. So what would what would be needed in order to achieve the benefit for both the efficient delivery of budget for deliberation, so that council can appropriately, under good governance, deliberate the budget. So absolutely, that's why I start there. My next question for you, Ms. Pinkson, as they're recognizing budget and the way budget looks, but has there ever been a conversation about a division of the capital budget within the cycle? Because capital is different than operating, where you have the two conversations, because the utilities, as we see, it's the philosophy of self-funding. There are some operational consequences, but the primary consequences are not affecting taxation, versus a budget or a conversation about those that do affect the operating budget. Did your head just explode? Or has that ever been considered? Is that something you've ever thought of, or it just we're moving into weird space here?
Sorry, my head might have just exploded. I'm not sure I understand your question.
So we've heard today from utilities, predominantly self-funded, little to no consequence on taxation through operations. That can be a completely different conversation than Section D, and some things that do require either have an operational impact or do require some support through taxation. It's just a question about whether or not the capital budget could be addressed in two separate considerations around funding source. Because a conversation around utility rates, yes, council's in charge of that, and yes, that does feed into operating budget, but you've got self-contained units that we can have a separate conversation at virtually any time about that. But if we're affecting taxation, you're absolutely correct. The CIP has to go in front of the operating budget in order to make the appropriate taxation adjustment. I don't know if that conversation or consideration has ever been made. Again, you've inherited a structure and a system that is as difficult to move as the organization writ large is. So
I think it's certainly something to explore in terms of splitting up at the CIP and doing it in two different stages, if that's the will of council.
Okay, my third and final question, if I can, Mayor Spearman, and this should come as no surprise, we're still considering this as a 4-year budget. I love option 3, but recognizing capital and operating are two different beasts. I would very much like to see, because I can't do it both on my iPad, I have to do it on my phone as well. I would very much like to see a review or a very fulsome check-in in year 3. If you look at it from the eyes of those who govern, you'd be elected in November of 2021. You do one operating budget in 2022. That's your one chance to affect the direction of the organization. It's your one chance to influence policy, to fight for the things that you want to see in the community. That's your last chance unless you're reelected in 2025. Nothing gets done if it's not in the budget, and you got one kick of the can in your term. City like Calgary, a little bit larger, does an annual budget. You've got multiple opportunities. I understand the philosophical wisdom of multi-year budgeting, and there have been situations, believe it or not, at FCM I've actually defended it. However, a downside from the governance opinion is the disconnect. We're disconnected from the budget. Is there the potential for a modified option 3? Again, back to the original question about resources and staff support. If you were to consider that, would you consider that, or be able to consider that, with a second check-in of just operating only in year 3? Capital, we all recognize that's a different funding model. It's borrowing, it's provincial, federal funding. That's not as nimble. Operating budget, we're looking at a different budget today than we were 2 years ago. Stuff happens, stuff changes. We've changed, but we've not changed in a process. So maybe that's, again, longer conversation. I don't know.
I think that we would just need direction from council on what option or what changes or amendments to the options that are presented that they would want us to explore, and we would go back and explore what that looks like.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you. I wondered if you could, if you know, historically speaking, if someone can take this, when this system was first implemented, what was the justification and reasoning for having the CIP at the end of a councillor's terms compared to at the beginning of a councillor's term? What was the thinking behind that? Just so I have an understanding of that.
Councillor Campbell, back when this structure was implemented, the majority of the rationale under the current process was about ensuring that the operating budget flowed into the operating impact of the CIP flowed into the operating budget. And so the timing of that, the structure had to be amended when the election term went from a 3-year to a 4-year. CIP was done in the final year because of just the timing of the operating budget. So in order to flow into the operating budget, it needed to be done fairly close to it to minimize the number of years that individuals needed to project the cost estimates. So, you know, we approve a 4-year budget, so cost estimates are being done, you know, sometimes 6 years in advance. And so spreading that out further just increases the challenge of estimating what capital costs would be related to the CIP. But the biggest reason was so that the operating costs of the CIP could flow into the operating budget to ensure that all of those have been captured in terms of implementation. So, you know, a project can be reviewed at any time. The intent is the MGA requires us to have a capital plan. Once that capital plan is set, it can be amended and revised with the individual projects on an ongoing basis. And you would have seen that several times this past year when stimulus funding opportunities came forward and we needed to kind of look at opportunities to present and under that. You've seen CIP amendments that have come forward in terms of scope change or cost change, or and so it really was just about the flow and timing, and that capital projects are often longer in nature. The ATV center is not something that you can build in a year or two, and so the 4-year structure helps to kind of align better with the construction cycle of projects, as well as just the stability to the community and of an awareness in terms of the timing of an opportunity of projects that have been approved by council.
So in your opinion, did that system work for you in your department the way it was for the most part?
Does the current process work?
Yeah, or has for your intents and purposes? Has it worked?
I can hear there's concerns from council that there are some issues. I think any structure will have some challenges and advantages. I think that, you know, option one, if council wants to do provide an update to related to projects that have operating impact in terms of, you know, section D, just given the political nature of that section, I think that's an opportunity. But we're resourced to address the current structure, and we would just have to make some changes if that wasn't supported by council going forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Spearman.
Okay, thank you. So council, it's 3:58. We have a 4 o'clock meeting. We have the presenter here. We could postpone the remaining items to after the 4 o'clock meeting, or we could postpone them to the March 24th Economic SPC meeting. Is there a preference?
Is there anything, I'm sorry, is there anything pressing? I'm just trying to scroll to my agenda. The 2 submissions, are they pressing, Your Worship?
There's a lot of information in 5.1 to go through. I'm not sure we could do that today. And 5.2 follows up on what we did earlier. So do you want to resume after the 4 o'clock meeting, or Do you want to resume on March 24th?
I'm just wondering if there are necessary approvals at the moment, or if they can be postponed to our next meeting. And I saw Haley trying to.
Sure. Okay, so Ms. Pinkson, what's your desire?
Mayor Spearman, if I may, 5.2 is just the summary, the CIP sheets based on the presentations from Waste and Recycling, as well as Waste and Water CIP sheets. So there really isn't a conversation, just additional information for budget deliberation week in terms of compiling all of the CIP sheets together. 5.1, we pulled together just in terms of any additional information that was referred to the CIP. Those were the submission details related to those referrals. And so really 5.1 and 5.2 are just additional information for compiling in terms of council's anticipation of budget deliberation week. And just so I don't know, unless of course there's questions of economic, but there's not, it wasn't intended in terms of additional discussion because the presentations have been done and then council's seen those referrals before. It was just more of a reminder that this is all the information that has been presented in the past. So I'm not sure that they need additional time unless there's specific questions. Would just wanted to kind of highlight that.
Thank you, Haley. I appreciate that response. In light of that, Your Worship, I'd make a motion that items 4.3, 5.1, and 5.2 be received for information. And regarding the presentation we just had, unless somebody is willing to make an option right now, I think just receiving as information gives council time to ponder and bring something forward at a council meeting if they desired. So I'd make that motion to receive them as information and thank the presenters.
Okay.
So I'll second that.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Campbell. And all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Now, that's the case, then I'll accept a motion for adjournment at this time.
So moved, Councillor Kaufman.
Councillor Kaufman, all in favor? Okay, so now I think you can stay on Teams. No? Okay. Okay, we're going to send you a new link for Teams. You can't.
They have a new link. They have the link.
Okay, so we're going to go in camera into closed session.
Yeah, just give us 5 minutes to get it all settled.
Okay, and it'll take about 5 minutes to get everything organized. So can I have a motion to go into closed session? So moved by Councillor Kaufman. All in favor? Okay. Any opposed? There are none. Okay, we'll look for the new link, the new Teams link, and we'll be resuming in about 5 minutes.